My name is Alara, and I'm 32 years old. For the last decade, my world has been a quiet universe of books, hushed library aisles, and the soft, steady rhythm of my younger sister Luna's breathing as she sleeps. But 3 weeks ago, I found myself in a place louder and colder than any I'd ever known. A family courtroom. My own parents were on the witness stand, their faces masks of righteous sorrow as they told the judge I was selfish, unstable, and unfit. They were trying to take away my future, and my sister's, all for the sake of money. But as they painted me as a monster under the harsh courtroom lights, they had no idea what my grandmother had left for me in a dusty safe deposit box. They thought they were fighting a timid librarian. They were about to find out they were fighting a ghost. If you've ever felt like the invisible child in your own family, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Before I tell you how this nightmare began and how it ended in a way no one saw coming, hit that like button and subscribe to hear more true stories about finding your voice when the people who should love you most try to silence you. Before my world imploded, my life was defined by a quiet, unwavering sense of duty. I'm a librarian in a small Ohio town, a job I love for its order and predictability. But my real job, the one that has shaped every decision I've made since I was 22, is being a caregiver for my sister, Luna. Luna is 28, and she was born with a severe form of cerebral palsy. She's nonverbal, requires a wheelchair, and needs round-the-clock assistance with everything from feeding to bathing. She is also the brightest light in my life. Her smile can melt the coldest winter day, and the way she communicates with her eyes a flicker of joy, a glimmer of mischief, is a language only we truly share. When I graduated from college with a degree in English literature, my dream was to open a small, independent bookstore, a cozy haven with worn leather armchairs and the smell of old paper and fresh coffee. But that was the year my father took an early retirement, and my mother declared she was too old to handle Luna's increasingly complex needs. My older brother, Leo, the golden child, was busy launching his third revolutionary tech startup, funded, of course, by my parents. So, the responsibility, as it always did, fell to me. "It's just for a little while, Alara," my mother had said, her voice laced with that familiar tone of weary martyrdom. "Just until Leo's company takes off. Then we'll have more than enough to hire professional help." That was 10 years ago. Leo's startups failed, one after another, each one draining more of my parents' savings. The professional help never materialized. The bookstore dream was carefully packed away in a box in my mind, next to other forgotten things like traveling, dating, or even just having a weekend to myself. I moved back home, took the stable librarian job, and built my life around Luna's schedule. I didn't just help out. I became her primary caregiver. I learned to manage her medications, operate her feeding tube, and perform the physical therapy exercises that kept her muscles from atrophying. I did it out of love, a deep, fierce love for my sister. But my parents saw it differently. They saw it as my duty, my preordained role in the family hierarchy. The favoritism towards Leo wasn't just a quiet undercurrent. It was the entire architecture of our family. He was the sun. Luna and I were just distant planets orbiting him, our needs secondary to his ambitions. I have countless memories that paint this picture, but two stand out with a particular sting. The first was the incident with my college fund. I had worked 2 part-time jobs through high school to supplement the modest account my parents had set up for me. By the time I was a freshman, it held just enough to cover my tuition without forcing me into crippling debt. In my sophomore year, Leo, then 24, had a brilliant idea for an app that would, in his words, disrupt the pet-sitting industry. He needed $20,000 in seed money. My parents, who had already given him thousands for other failed ventures, were tapped out. I remember sitting at the kitchen table as my father explained the situation. "Leo is on the cusp of something big, Alara," he said, not meeting my eyes. "This is a short-term investment for a long-term family gain. We've had to reallocate your college fund. You understand, don't you? You're smart. You can get loans. A degree from a state school is just a piece of paper anyway." I didn't understand. I felt a hot, sickening wave of betrayal wash over me. The money I had worked for, the future I was building, was being casually handed over to my brother for another one of his pipe dreams. When I protested, my mother sighed dramatically. "Don't be so selfish, dear. When Leo is a millionaire, he'll pay you back 10 times over. We are a family. We support the one with the most potential." I ended up taking out tens of thousands of dollars in student loans, a debt I am still paying off to this day. Leo's app folded in 6 months. He never paid me back a dime. The second incident happened about 3 years ago and was far more cruel. My parents' house had a wooden wheelchair ramp leading to the back door, which was the only way I could get Luna in and out of the house. After a harsh winter, the wood had started to rot, and a large section near the top had become dangerously soft. I told my parents it needed to be replaced immediately. My father got a quote, $3,000. "We just don't have it right now, Alara," he said, shaking his head. "Things are tight." End quote. 2 weeks later, they announced they were going on a week-long cruise to the Caribbean. When I stared at them in disbelief, my mother had the audacity to say, "What? We deserve a break. You have no idea how stressful it is worrying about you girls." The ramp remained broken. For the entire summer, every time I needed to take Luna to a doctor's appointment or just out for some fresh air, I had to perform a precarious, back-straining maneuver, positioning her wheelchair at the bottom of the stairs, then carrying her 110-pound body up 3 steps and into the house. It was dangerous for both of us. One slip could have been catastrophic. They watched me do this, day after day, and never once offered to cancel their trip or divert the funds. Leo, visiting one afternoon, even commented, "Wow, you're getting a good workout." That was my life. I was the reliable, responsible daughter, the built-in caregiver whose own needs and dreams were perpetually on the back burner. I had accepted it, not with happiness, but with the resigned practicality of someone who sees no other choice. My love for Luna was the anchor that kept me from drifting into total resentment. For her, I would do anything. I thought I had accepted my role. I thought this was just my life. But I had no idea my grandmother, my mother's mother, was watching it all with sharp, discerning eyes. And I had no idea that her final act of love would set our entire world on fire. I believed the pattern was set in stone, that I would forever be the family's safety net, always giving and never receiving. But a single letter from a lawyer was about to change everything, triggering a storm that would reveal the true, ugly nature of the people I called family. The call came on a Tuesday morning. It was from Mr. Abernathy, my grandmother Rose's attorney. My grandmother had passed away peacefully in her sleep the night before at the age of 88. The grief was immediate and immense. Grandma Rose was more than just a grandmother to me. She was my sanctuary. She was the one who listened, really listened, when I spoke of my dreams for the bookstore. She never judged, never told me I was being selfish. She would press a $20 bill into my hand and whisper, "For your book fund, dear. Don't you ever give up on that." She saw the family dynamics for what they were, often making sharp, witty comments about Leo's business follies and my parents' blatant favoritism, much to my mother's annoyance. Her home was the one place I felt seen, not as a caregiver or a second-class daughter, but as Alara. Her death left a gaping hole in my life. The funeral was a blur of black clothes, murmured condolences, and my parents' performative grief. My mother wept loudly, clinging to my father's arm, while Leo stood by looking stoic and important, accepting sympathies as if he were the chief mourner. He'd visited Grandma Rose twice in the last 5 years. I, on the other hand, had spent every Sunday afternoon with her, reading aloud to her when her eyesight began to fail, and just being in her quiet, comforting presence. A week after the funeral, Mr. Abernathy summoned the 5 of us, my parents, Leo, Luna, and me, to his office for the reading of the will. I wheeled Luna into the stuffy, wood-paneled conference room, feeling a sense of dread. I expected the usual. The house and the bulk of her modest estate would go to my mother, her only child, with perhaps a small, sentimental bequest for each of the grandchildren. My parents and Leo were already there, their anticipation palpable. They viewed this not as the final wishes of a loved one, but as the final accounting of their inheritance. Mr. Abernathy, a kind man with gentle eyes, began to read. The language was formal, but the will was simple. Her house and its contents were to go to my parents, Richard and Margaret. A sum of $50,000 was to go to her grandson, Leo. My parents exchanged a satisfied smile. This was proceeding as expected. Then Mr. Abernathy cleared his throat and looked directly at me. "And now," he said, his voice softening, "we come to the remainder of the estate, to my beloved granddaughter, Elara, who has shown a capacity for love and sacrifice that has been the great pride of my life. I leave the entirety of my investment portfolio, currently valued at approximately $500,000. The room went utterly silent. I could hear the faint ticking of a grandfather clock in the hallway. I was sure I had misheard. $500,000? To me? Mr. Abernathy continued, his voice firm, as if anticipating an objection. These funds are to be placed in a trust, with Elara as the sole trustee. It is my most fervent and explicit wish that she use this money for two purposes. First, to finally open her long-dreamed-of bookstore, a place of community and learning which I know she will make wonderful. Second, and most importantly, to secure a future for herself and her sister, Luna, ensuring that Luna receives the highest quality of care in a loving environment, independent of any other family obligations. He paused, then delivered the final, devastating blow. It is my specific and intentional wish that my daughter, Margaret, my son-in-law, Richard, and my grandson, Leo, have no access to or control over these funds in any capacity, as I have witnessed firsthand their financial irresponsibility and their tendency to prioritize their own interests above the well-being of others. The air in the lawyer's office turned to ice. Leo's face, which had been smug just moments before, was now a mask of furious disbelief. My father's jaw was clenched so tight I could see a muscle twitching in his cheek. But it was my mother's reaction that was the most chilling. Her face crumpled, not in grief, but in pure, unadulterated rage. "This is an outrage," she hissed, her voice trembling. "Mother must have been senile. She wasn't in her right mind. Elara? A librarian managing $500,000? It's irresponsible. That money is for Luna's care. It belongs to the family, to us, to manage properly." The will is perfectly clear, Margaret," Mr. Abernathy said calmly. "Rose was of completely sound mind when she signed this 6 months ago. We have a doctor's certification to that effect. Elara is in full control." I sat there, stunned, clutching Luna's hand. In one breathtaking moment, my grandmother had given me everything I had ever wanted. The means to achieve my dream, and the freedom to care for my sister on my own terms. It was a gift of unimaginable generosity, but as I looked at the thunderous faces of my family, I knew it wasn't just a gift. It was a weapon, and they had just declared war. The shock of the inheritance quickly gave way to a terrifying realization. This money wasn't a bridge to a new life. It was a battleground, and I was standing on it, alone, against the very people who were supposed to protect me. The days following the will reading were a masterclass in psychological warfare. My family, realizing they couldn't challenge the will's legality directly, launched a campaign of emotional manipulation designed to break me down and force me to hand over control of the trust. It started with my mother. She would call me every single day, her voice thick with manufactured tears. "I just can't understand it, Elara," she'd sob into the phone. "How could Mother do this to me, her only daughter? She must have been confused. You know how Luna's needs are. They're so complex. We have the experience. You're just a librarian. You'll be overwhelmed. You're being so selfish, clinging to this money when your sister's entire future is at stake." Each conversation was a carefully crafted guilt trip. She painted a picture of me as a naive, greedy child, and them as the wise, experienced parents who only wanted what was best for their disabled daughter. It was insidious because it preyed on my deepest insecurities. Was I really capable of managing this? Was I being selfish? But then I'd look at Luna, at her trusting eyes, and I'd remember my grandmother's words in the will, and my resolve would harden, if only for a few more hours. When guilt didn't work, my father switched to intimidation. He showed up at the library during my lunch break one afternoon. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His presence, looming over my small desk in the staff room, was enough. "Let's stop this foolishness, Alara," he said, his voice a low growl. "You're in over your head. I've spoken to our lawyer. We're prepared to take action if we have to. Just sign the papers to make us co-trustees. It's the smart thing to do. I am your father. I know what's best." "Grandma knew what was best," I replied, my own voice trembling slightly. "She trusted me." He scoffed, a look of utter disdain on his face. "She was an old woman who was charmed by your books and your quiet act. This is the real world. You can't handle it." He left a document on my desk, giving me power of attorney over the trust. "Think about it," he said as he walked away. "Don't make us do this the hard way." The pressure was immense, but it was Leo who took it to a new level of cruelty. He began a quiet smear campaign among our extended family. He'd call aunts, uncles, and cousins, spinning a tale of a conniving Alara who had somehow manipulated our grandmother and was now planning to squander Luna's inheritance on a vanity project bookstore, leaving her disabled sister destitute. Soon, the calls started coming in. My Aunt Carol, who I'd always been close to, called to say she was deeply concerned. My Uncle Mark told me I needed to do the right thing by the family. They had all been fed a narrative that cast me as the villain. I felt utterly alone, isolated by a web of lies spun by my own brother. The attempts to wear me down were relentless. My parents would show up at the house unannounced, bringing pamphlets for high-cost institutional care facilities for Luna. "We're just exploring options, dear," my mother would say sweetly, leaving the glossy brochures on the coffee table. The message was clear. If you don't give us the money, this is where your sister will end up. I tried, desperately, to have a rational conversation with them. I invited them over for dinner one night, without Leo. I laid out my plan, how I had already consulted with a financial advisor, how I was researching accessible housing for me and Luna, how the bookstore would provide a stable, long-term income that would allow me to be more present for her. "I'm not cutting you out," I pleaded. "I just want to honor Grandma's wishes." My father just stared at me, his arms crossed. "Your grandmother's wishes were misguided. You're being emotional. This is a financial matter, and you simply don't have the experience." My mother started crying again. "I can't believe you're doing this to us. After all we've done for you, we gave you a roof over your head." "You took my college fund," I finally snapped, the words bursting out of me before I could stop them. "You let me carry my sister up and down the stairs for a whole summer so you could go on a cruise." "All you've done for me has always come at a price, and I'm not willing to pay it anymore." The outburst only made things worse. They accused me of being ungrateful and hysterical. They left in a huff, and the next day, the official letter arrived. It was from their attorney, a formal notice of their intent to file a petition in family court. They were suing their own daughter. The grounds were audacious. They claimed that my history of financial instability, my student loan debt, which they had caused, and my emotional and psychological distress, my grief over my grandmother's death, made me an unfit trustee. They were petitioning the court to remove me and appoint them as the sole managers of Luna's inheritance. That night, I sat on my bed, the legal summons in my hand, feeling the walls close in. I was starting to doubt myself, to wonder if they were right. Maybe I was in over my head. I called my best friend, Chloe, a sharp-witted nurse who had known me since kindergarten and had witnessed my family's dynamics firsthand. I read the letter to her, my voice breaking. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then Chloe's voice, clear and steady as a surgeon's hand, cut through my panic. "Listen to me, Alara," she said. "Do you hear yourself? They are gaslighting you. This has nothing to do with Luna's care. This is about control. They cannot stand that Grandma Rose gave you the power. They've spent your whole life making you feel small so they could stay big. Don't you dare let them win." Her words were like a splash of cold water. She was right. This wasn't about my competence. It was about their power. They weren't trying to protect Luna. They were trying to control her money, just as they had always tried to control me. Hearing it from an outside perspective solidified my resolve. They wanted a fight? They were going to get one. I read the legal summons again. But this time my hands weren't shaking with fear. They were steady with anger. They were taking their own daughter to court based on lies and manipulation. But what they didn't know was that the fight wouldn't just be my word against theirs. It would be my word against theirs, and the carefully documented truth from a ghost. The weeks leading up to the court date were a slow, grinding torment. My parents' legal strategy was clear: to paint me as an unstable, overwhelmed, and selfish person who was completely incapable of caring for her sister without their expert guidance. They used every tool at their disposal, twisting my love and dedication into a narrative of obsession and incompetence. Their lawyer requested depositions. I had to sit for hours in a sterile conference room while a man I'd never met asked me invasive questions about my personal life, my finances, my mental health. He brought up the student loans, framing them not as a result of my parents' actions, but as proof of my own financial recklessness. He questioned why I wasn't married, subtly implying that a single woman couldn't possibly provide a stable home. He even brought up my grief, suggesting that my sadness over my grandmother's death was a sign of emotional instability that clouded my judgment. It was a brutal character assassination, and my parents sat there, watching, their faces impassive. But the cruelty wasn't confined to the legal proceedings. It seeped into our daily lives. One afternoon, I came home from work to find my mother in the living room with a woman I didn't recognize. The woman was holding a clipboard and looking around the room with a critical eye. "Oh, Alara, dear," my mother said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "This is Janice from the Serene Meadows Care Facility. We were just having a look around. I told her you've been finding it all a bit much lately." I stared at her, horrified. She had brought a representative from a long-term care facility into our home without my knowledge, treating Luna as if she were a piece of furniture to be assessed and moved. Luna, who was sitting in her wheelchair in the corner, had a look of deep distress in her eyes. She couldn't speak, but I could feel her fear. "Get out," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "Now, Alara, don't be rude," my mother began. "Get out of my house. Now," I repeated, my voice rising. The woman, Janice, looked startled, gathered her things, and scurried out the door. My mother looked at me, her eyes flashing with anger. "You see? This is what we mean. You're so emotional. You can't make rational decisions." That was the moment I stopped seeing her as my mother and started seeing her as my opponent. But the final, unforgivable straw came a week before the court date. It was Luna's 28th birthday. I had planned a small, quiet celebration for her. I baked her favorite cake, a soft lemon sponge she could eat easily, and invited Chloe and a few of Luna's physical therapists, who had become like family. It was supposed to be a happy day, a small island of joy in a sea of stress. My parents and Leo arrived an hour late. They didn't bring a gift for Luna. Instead, my father was carrying a large, official-looking binder. "We need to talk, Ilara," he said, ignoring the festive decorations and the waiting cake. "We have our final statement for the judge. We think it's only fair you see it before we present it." He opened the binder on the dining room table. It was a psychological evaluation. Not of me, but of Luna. They had, without my consent, taken Luna for an assessment with a psychologist of their choosing. The report was a disgusting work of fiction. It described Luna as being in a persistent vegetative state, incapable of emotion or connection. It claimed she was unresponsive to stimuli, and that her quality of life was minimal. It concluded that she required institutionalization and that her care was far beyond the abilities of a layperson caregiver like myself. I read the words, and a white-hot rage, purer and more intense than anything I had ever felt, consumed me. This was my sister they were talking about, my Luna, who loved music, who would light up when I played her favorite Debussy piece. My Luna, who had a wicked sense of humor and would communicate her amusement with a specific twinkle in her eye. My Luna, who just that morning had squeezed my hand 3 times our signal for "I love you." They had taken her, my vulnerable sister who could not speak for herself, and paid a stranger to medically erase her personality, her spirit, her very humanity, all to build their legal case. They were willing to strip her of her dignity, to declare her life meaningless, just to get their hands on her money. I looked up from the report, my eyes meeting my father's. He didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. He looked triumphant. "The judge will have to listen to this, Alara," he said smugly. "It's a professional opinion." In that moment, something inside me broke. Not my spirit, but the last fragile thread of hope that my parents were simply misguided. They weren't. They were cruel. They were monsters hiding in plain sight. And they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. They had underestimated me. But more importantly, they had underestimated my grandmother. I stood up, walked over to the table, and closed the binder with a soft click. "Thank you for showing me this," I said, my voice eerily calm. "You've made everything perfectly clear." Chloe and the therapist watched, their faces pale with shock. They knew Luna. They knew the report was a lie. I looked at my parents and my brother. 3 people who shared my blood, but not an ounce of my heart, and I felt no love, no conflict, only a cold, hard certainty. The time for quiet suffering was over. The time for fighting back had begun. As they left, smug and self-assured, I walked to my closet and pulled out a small, locked box. They thought their psychological report was their trump card, but they had no idea Grandma Rose had left me an entire deck of aces. The day after Luna's disastrous birthday party, I took a personal day from the library. My first call was to a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but the best family law attorney in the state. A woman named Isabella Rossi, who had a reputation for being a shark in the courtroom and a fierce advocate for her clients. I had found her through a legal aid society my grandmother had supported. When I mentioned my grandmother's name, I was given an appointment for that same afternoon. I walked into her sleek, downtown office, feeling like a soldier preparing for battle. I brought with me the small, locked box my grandmother had given me on my 21st birthday. "Don't open this unless you find yourself in a fight you think you can't win," she had told me, her eyes twinkling. "There's more than one way to protect the people you love." At the time, I thought she meant sentimental keepsakes. I was about to find out how wrong I was. Isabella Rossi was a formidable woman in her 50s, with sharp eyes and an even sharper mind. I laid out the entire story, from my parents' long history of neglect and favoritism to the lawsuit and the vile psychological report. She listened intently, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she simply said, "What's in the box?" With trembling hands, I unlocked it. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was my grandmother's secret weapon. It wasn't one thing. It was a meticulously curated archive of my parents' failures. First, there were the letters. A series of over 30 letters, handwritten by my grandmother to my mother over the past 10 years, each one dated and notarized. They were polite on the surface, but devastating in their content. One letter, dated the summer of the broken ramp, read, "My dearest Margaret, I was so concerned to hear from Alara that Luna's ramp is still in disrepair. It must be terribly difficult for her to manage the stairs with Luna. I do hope your Caribbean vacation was restful enough to give you the energy to address this urgent safety matter upon your return." End quote. Another, from the time they took my college fund. "I was surprised to learn of your decision to fund Leo's new venture with Alara's tuition money. While I admire your faith in your son, I trust you have a clear, written plan to reimburse your daughter so that her future is not compromised by his ambitions." Each letter was a quiet, documented testament to their selfishness, proving that their neglect was not a recent development, but a long-standing pattern that my grandmother had been challenging for years. Next, there was a small, leather-bound journal. It was a financial ledger. For 15 years, Grandma Rose had been giving my parents a monthly stipend of $500, explicitly designated for Luna's ancillary care therapies, equipment, respite. She had noted every single payment. Alongside it, she had kept receipts and bank statements she had somehow obtained, showing where the money had actually gone. Leo's car payments, my mother's shopping sprees, my father's golf club membership. It was a cold, hard record of embezzlement. But the most powerful item was at the bottom of the box. It was a collection of several small USB drives. "What are these?" Isabella asked, her eyebrows raised. "I have no idea," I confessed. She plugged the first one into her laptop. The screen flickered to life, showing my grandmother's living room. The camera angle was from a high corner, discreet. My grandmother appeared on screen, sitting in her favorite armchair, looking directly at the camera. "This is Rose Miller," she said, her voice clear and strong. "The date is October 14th, 2 years ago. I have installed this camera because I have become deeply concerned about the treatment of my granddaughter Luna by her parents." What followed was a video diary. There were hours of footage. Clips of my mother complaining on the phone about the burden of having Luna for a weekend so I could have a rare day off. A clip of my father telling Leo not to worry about paying back a loan because they could just dip into the Luna fund. And then, the most damning video of all. It was footage from the day they had taken Luna for the sham psychological evaluation. The video showed them coaching Luna before they went in. "Now, Luna, when the doctor asks you questions, just stay very still," my mother's voice cooed. "Don't try to smile or make any noises. Just be a sleepy girl for Mommy, okay? It's very important that you seem peaceful." They had actively coached my disabled sister to fake being unresponsive to have her declared incompetent. It was premeditated, malicious fraud. Isabella Rossi watched the final clip, her face like stone. She turned off the monitor and looked at me. For the first time, I saw a flicker of emotion in her eyes. Cold, controlled fury. "Well?" she said, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across her face. "This isn't just a family dispute anymore. This is a slaughter. Your parents have just handed us everything we need to not only win, but to utterly dismantle their case and their credibility permanently." For the next 2 hours, we built our counter plan. It was brilliant in its simplicity. We would not reveal our hand before the trial. We would let my parents and their lawyer present their entire case. We would let them call their witnesses, submit their falsified report, and testify under oath, digging their own graves deeper with every lie. "And then," Isabella said, her eyes gleaming, "you will take the stand, and we will present the truth, piece by painstaking piece. We will use their own greed and cruelty against them. By the time we are done, the judge won't just rule in your favor. He will be so appalled he may recommend charges be filed against them for fraud and perjury." I walked out of her office that day feeling transformed. The fear and doubt that had plagued me for weeks had been replaced by a powerful, righteous anger. I was no longer the victim. I was the keeper of the truth. My quiet, gentle grandmother had armed me for the fight of my life from beyond the grave. And I would not fail her. The court date was set. My parents walked into that room believing they held all the cards, ready to deliver the final blow. They had no idea I wasn't there to defend myself. I was there to be their executioner. The courtroom felt like an arena. The air was thick with tension, smelling of old wood and stale coffee. I sat at the plaintiff's table with Isabella, my hands folded neatly in my lap. Across the aisle, my parents and Leo sat with their lawyer, looking confident, almost smug. They whispered to each other, occasionally shooting me looks of pity, as if I were a lost child who had wandered into the wrong room. Luna was with Chloe in the courthouse waiting area, shielded from the ugliness that was about to unfold. The judge, a stern-faced man named Judge Alistair Black, entered and the proceedings began. My parents' lawyer, Mr. Davies, opened with a flowery, condescending speech about the tragic circumstances that had brought us here. He painted a picture of my parents as loving, devoted caregivers who had been unjustly cut out of their own mother's will by a confused and grieving old woman. He portrayed me as a well-meaning but emotionally fragile librarian, completely unequipped for the immense responsibility of managing Luna's care and finances. Their first witness was my father. He took the stand, placed his hand on the Bible, and swore an oath to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Then he proceeded to lie with a straight face for the next 45 minutes. He spoke of my erratic behavior since Grandma Rose's death. He described my student loan debt as a sign of my profound financial irresponsibility. He testified that Luna's care was a 24/7 job that had left me burnt out and incapable of sound judgment. Isabella's cross-examination was deceptively gentle at first. "Mr. Miller," she began, "you testified that you are deeply concerned about your daughter Alara's financial acumen. Is that correct?" Yes, deeply, my father said gravely. And this concern stems, in part, from her college debt. That's right. A sign of poor planning. I see, Isabella said, picking up a document. Could you please identify this document for the court? It was a copy of the letter I had received from the university's financial aid office, explaining that my parental contribution had been withdrawn. It appears to be a letter, my father stammered, his face paling slightly. Indeed. A letter confirming that you and your wife withdrew your financial support for your daughter's education to fund your son's failed business venture. Is it not true, Mr. Miller? That you are the direct cause of the very debt you are now using to question her competence? Mr. Davies jumped to his feet. Objection? Relevance? It speaks directly to the witness's credibility and motivations, Your Honor, Isabella said smoothly. Overruled, Judge Black grunted. The witness will answer the question. My father was flustered. It was a family decision. A loan. A loan that was never repaid? Isabella pressed. Did you ever at any point help your daughter with the financial burden you placed upon her? No, he mumbled. Next came my mother. She was even more effective, crying on the stand as she described how much she loved Luna and how she only wanted to protect her. She spoke of my selfish desire to open a bookstore, calling it a frivolous dream that I was putting ahead of my sister's needs. Then they submitted their trump card, the fraudulent psychological report. Dr. Adams, the psychologist they had hired, took the stand and testified to its contents, describing Luna as vegetative and confirming that she needed institutional care managed by experienced guardians, that is to say, my parents. By the time they rested their case, the atmosphere in the room was heavy. They had painted a compelling, if entirely false, picture. I could feel the judge's gaze on me, filled with doubt. The plaintiff calls Alara Miller to the stand, Isabella announced. I walked to the stand, my heart hammering against my ribs. I swore the oath, my voice clear and steady. Isabella approached me. Miss Miller, she began, your parents have testified that you are an unstable and irresponsible caregiver. How do you respond to that? I respond by saying that for 10 years, I have been the only consistent and responsible caregiver my sister has had, I said, looking directly at the judge. For the next hour, Isabella led me through my testimony. We dismantled their narrative, piece by piece. But the real fireworks began when she said, Your Honor, we would like to present evidence that directly contradicts the testimony of the previous witnesses and the validity of the submitted psychological report. She started with the financial ledger. An enlarged copy was displayed on the courtroom monitors. Miss Miller, can you identify this? It's my grandmother's financial journal. It details 15 years of payments she made to my parents for Luna's care. And can you tell the court where that money went? We then presented the bank statements, highlighting every golf trip, every shopping spree, every check written to Leo. My parents stared at the screen, their faces turning from pink to a sickly gray. Next came the letters. Isabella had me read 3 of them aloud. My voice filled the silent courtroom as I read my grandmother's polite but damning words about the broken ramp, the college fund, and their general neglect. My mother began to weep, but this time, her tears were real. Finally, Isabella turned to the psychological report. Dr. Adams testified that Luna is unresponsive. Is that your experience? No, I said firmly. My sister is full of life and emotion. She communicates constantly, if non-verbally. Oh, Your Honor, Isabella said, turning to the judge. We have one final piece of evidence. It is a video recording. I must warn the court. Its contents are deeply disturbing. She played the video from the USB drive. The courtroom watched in stunned silence as the footage of my mother coaching Luna to fake being unresponsive filled the screens. Just be a sleepy girl for mommy, okay? It's very important that you seem peaceful. A collective gasp went through the room. My parents' lawyer buried his face in his hands. Leo looked like he was going to be sick. My father stared straight ahead, his face a blank mask of ruin. But my mother simply crumbled, her body shaking with silent, racking sobs. The video ended. The silence was absolute. Judge Black stared at the screen for a long moment, his face a thundercloud of fury. He slowly turned his gaze from the screen to my parents. He removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes, a gesture of profound weariness and disgust. He looked at Mr. Davies. Is your client aware that coaching a witness and submitting falsified medical evidence to a court of law are criminal offenses? Mr. Davies could only shake his head, speechless. The judge then looked at my parents, his voice dangerously low and dripping with contempt. In 25 years on this bench, he began, I have witnessed a great deal of human folly. I have seen greed, jealousy, and bitterness poison families, but I can honestly say I have never witnessed a display of such calculated, soulless cruelty as I have seen from you two today. He gestured towards me. You have a daughter who has sacrificed her youth, her dreams, and her own future to lovingly care for her sister, a responsibility that was, by all rights, yours. And your response? You sue her, you slander her, you attempt to steal her inheritance. And worst of all, his voice rose to a roar, you conspired to medically and legally erase the humanity of your other daughter, the most vulnerable member of your family, reducing her to a pawn in your disgusting game for money. He slammed his gavel down, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Petition denied, with extreme prejudice. The trust stands as written, with Miss Alara Miller as the sole trustee. Furthermore, I am ordering a full investigation into the creation of this fraudulent psychological report and referring this case to the District Attorney's Office for potential charges of perjury, fraud, and conspiracy against Richard and Margaret Miller. Now get out of my courtroom. They stumbled out of the courtroom, not as powerful parents, but as disgraced criminals. I had won, but as the adrenaline faded, I was left with a chilling question. How do you rebuild a life from the ashes of the family that tried to burn you down? Walking out of that courtroom was like stepping out of a pressure cooker. The air outside, cool and crisp with the promise of autumn, felt like the first breath of a new life. Chloe was waiting with Luna, her face etched with worry. When she saw my expression, she broke into a wide grin. I knelt in front of Luna's wheelchair and took her hands. We did it, Lou, I whispered, my voice thick with unshed tears. We're free. Luna looked at me, and a slow, beautiful smile spread across her face. She understood. The immediate aftermath was chaotic. News of the judge's ruling and his referral to the DA spread like wildfire through our small town and extended family. The phone rang off the hook. First came the calls from my aunts and uncles, the same ones who had called to pressure me weeks before. Now, their tones were completely different, apologetic, fawning, suddenly eager to be on my side. I listened politely and then told them I needed some space. My parents and Leo disappeared. They didn't go home. Later, I would find out they had gone to a hotel, too ashamed to face their neighbors. Their lawyer, Mr. Davies, formally withdrew from their case the next day, citing irreconcilable differences. The district attorney's office confirmed they had opened an investigation. My first act of freedom was to move out. The house I had shared with them was no longer a home. It was a crime scene, tainted with years of manipulation and the fresh wounds of their betrayal. With the help of Isabella and a portion of the trust funds my grandmother had intended for this very purpose, I found a beautiful, fully accessible ground-floor apartment for rent in a quieter part of town. It had wide doorways, a roll-in shower for Luna, and a small patio garden. The day we moved was a celebration. Chloe and a few of my librarian friends came to help, forming a cheerful, laughing assembly line of boxes and furniture. We ordered pizza, played music, and for the first time in a decade, I felt a sense of ownership over my own life. Watching Luna sit on our new patio, her face tilted up to the sun, was a moment of pure, unadulterated joy. This was our home, our sanctuary. No one could take it from us. The sense of peace was profound. The constant, low-grade anxiety that had been my companion for years began to dissipate. I no longer had to walk on eggshells, bracing for the next guilt trip or passive-aggressive comment. I could make decisions what to have for dinner, what to watch on TV, when to schedule Luna's appointments without needing to justify them to anyone. The initial fate of my parents was swift and brutal. The social fallout was immense. My father was asked to step down from the board of the local historical society. My mother became a pariah in her bridge club. Friends they had known for decades crossed the street to avoid them. They had built their lives on a foundation of respectability. And in one afternoon, Judge Black had demolished it. Legally, they were in serious trouble. Facing potential criminal charges, they eventually accepted a plea deal. They pled guilty to misdemeanor fraud, received 2 years of probation, and were ordered to pay a hefty fine and attend mandatory family counseling. The psychologist, Dr. Adams, had his license suspended pending a full ethical review by the state medical board. Leo, while not charged, was guilty by association. His reputation in the local business community was shattered. I started to build our new life. I hired a part-time in-home nurse to help with Luna a few hours a day, giving me the freedom to focus on the bookstore. The word bookstore was no longer a wistful dream. It was a business plan, a set of blueprints, a tangible reality taking shape. I found the perfect location, a charming old storefront on Main Street, and signed the lease. The sign painter was scheduled for next month. Rose's Corner, in honor of the woman who had made it all possible. There was a strange emptiness at first, a void left by the constant drama my family had created. But I quickly learned to fill that void with positive things, planning my business, reconnecting with friends, and most importantly, simply being present with Luna. We discovered new routines, new joys. We would spend evenings on the patio, me reading aloud to her hand resting peacefully in mine. In the quiet of our new home, I realized just how loud my old life had been, filled with the noise of their needs, their demands, their endless disappointment. Here, there was only peace. We were safe, and we were free. I thought the worst was over, but I soon realized that while the legal battle had ended, the emotional one was just beginning. The question wasn't just about how to live without them, but how to heal from them. It has been exactly 2 years since Judge Black slammed his gavel down and shattered the illusions my family had lived by. I remember thinking that day was the end, but really, it was just the starting line. Today, as I stand behind the polished oak counter of Rose's Corner, a delicate cloud of steam rising from my morning cup of tea, my life is unrecognizable from the suffocating existence I led back then. The bookstore is more beautiful than I had ever dared to dream. Sunlight streams through the large front window, illuminating rows of lovingly curated books. The air smells of paper, ink, and the faint, sweet scent of lavender from the small sachets I tuck onto the shelves, just like Grandma Rose used to do in her linen closet. In the corner, a children's section I named Luna's Nook is filled with colorful picture books and soft floor cushions, and it's almost always occupied by giggling toddlers during our story hours. Rose's Corner isn't just a business. It's become the heart of the community and the anchor of the life I built for myself and my sister. The income from the store, combined with the carefully managed trust, means that for the first time in my adult life, I don't lie awake at night worrying about money. Our future is secure. Luna is thriving in ways I never thought possible. We found a wonderful team of caregivers and therapists who treat her with the respect she deserves. The in-home nurse, a warm and capable woman named Maria, has become a dear friend and a pseudo-aunt to Luna. With consistent, high-quality physical therapy paid for by the trust my parents tried to steal, Luna's mobility has improved significantly. But the biggest change is in her spirit, freed from the tense, oppressive atmosphere of my parents' home, where she was treated as a burden. She is more expressive, more engaged. The light in her eyes shines brighter than ever before. She spends several afternoons a week at the bookstore with me, sitting in her specialized chair in her nook, happily observing the comings and goings of our customers. She is a silent, beloved fixture of Rose's Corner. The justice my family faced wasn't just legal. It was a natural, karmic unfolding of the consequences of their actions. My parents completed their 2 years of probation, but they emerged from the experience as changed people, humbled, isolated, and forced to confront the wreckage they had created. The mandatory counseling, which they had initially fought tooth and nail, had slowly forced them to look at their behavior in a mirror they couldn't look away from. My mother was the first to crack. It started about 8 months after the trial with a tentative letter, slipped under my apartment door. It wasn't full of the usual excuses or subtle blame. It was a simple, painful apology. She wrote about her own childhood, her jealousy of my bond with my grandmother, and her own deep-seated insecurities that she had projected onto me and Leo. It didn't erase the past, and it didn't magically fix everything, but it was the first honest thing she had said to me in decades. My father took longer. His pride was a fortress, but eventually, he came to the bookstore one rainy Tuesday afternoon, looking older and more tired than I had ever seen him. He didn't apologize with words. I don't think he knew how. Instead, he walked over to Luna's nook, knelt beside his daughter's wheelchair, and took her hand. He just sat there with her for 10 minutes, in complete silence, tears streaming down his face. It was the most profound apology I had ever received from him. We began to slowly, cautiously, rebuild something new. It wasn't the old family dynamic. That was dead and buried in that courtroom. This was something different, built on a foundation of brutal honesty and clearly defined boundaries. They are allowed to visit Luna, but only at our apartment or the bookstore, and only on our terms. There are no more demands, no more manipulations, and no more unsolicited advice. They are guests in our life, and for the first time, they respect that. Leo's fate was perhaps the most telling. Without my parents' financial safety net, which was severely depleted by their legal fees, fines, and the loss of the trust, he was forced to get a real job. He's now working as a mid-level manager at a logistics company, his grand entrepreneurial dreams replaced by the mundane reality of spreadsheets and quarterly reports. I hear through the grapevine that he's miserable, and for the first time, he has no one to blame but himself. He and I have no relationship. He never apologized, and I never expected him to. His punishment is living a life devoid of the special treatment he had always believed was his birthright. I established a new kind of family, a chosen family. Chloe, who stood by me when everyone else turned away. Maria, my friends from the library. Isabella, my fierce lawyer who still checks in on us. And the regular customers at the bookstore, they are the ones who celebrated our victories and supported us through the transition. They are the ones who see me and Luna for who we are, not what we can provide. Just last week, my mother was visiting the apartment. She was sitting with Luna, patiently reading her a story, something I had never, ever seen her do when we lived under their roof. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with a sad, hard-won wisdom. "You know," she said quietly, closing the book, "your grandmother was right. She didn't just give you money, Alara. She gave you permission to have a life we should have given you all along." I nodded, accepting her words for the peace offering they were. The anger I had held onto for so long, the anger that had fueled me through the trial, had finally begun to soften, replaced by a quiet, settled peace. I hadn't just survived. I had built something beautiful from the ruins. My grandmother hadn't just left me an inheritance. She had left me a legacy of strength, and I was finally living up to it. I had found peace and built a new life, but I knew true healing meant understanding the lessons learned. Looking back, I realized the judge's final words were just the beginning. The real verdict on my life was the one I was now writing for myself. Looking back on the past 2 years, it's easy to focus on the dramatic courtroom showdown, that incredible moment of triumphant vindication when the truth finally came out. And believe me, that moment was satisfying. Seeing the masks of self-righteousness fall from my parents' faces, hearing Judge Black give voice to the righteous anger I had suppressed for years, it was a necessary and cathartic climax. But the real victory, the most profound lesson, didn't happen in that courtroom. It happened in the quiet, often difficult moments that followed. I want to be honest about something. Winning in court didn't mean I woke up the next day perfectly healed. It didn't feel like a victory parade every day. There were nights I woke up drenched in sweat, hearing my mother's sobs in that courtroom, wondering if I had been too harsh. There were days the old guilt, that deeply programmed voice they had installed in my head telling me I was a bad daughter, a selfish sister, tried to crawl back in. But each time, I would look at Luna, happy and safe in our own home. Or I'd unlock the door to Rose's corner and smell the old books. And I would remind myself, I didn't break the family. I just stopped being the glue that held their broken pieces together at my own expense. For my entire life, my role had been defined for me by others. I was the responsible one, the caregiver, the safety net. My identity was built on sacrifice. I had convinced myself that this was a noble existence. They had convinced me it was noble. That's how manipulation works in families like mine. It doesn't always look like shouting or violence. Sometimes, it looks like weaponized duty. It sounds like, "We're a family, Alara," or "You're the only one who can do this." They wrap their demands in the language of love until you can't tell the difference between devotion and servitude. A life built only on the needs of others is a cage, no matter how gilded it is with that language of duty. My grandmother, in her infinite wisdom, saw through that fog. The inheritance was never just about the money. It was about power. It was about shifting the balance, taking the power that my parents had hoarded for themselves and placing it firmly in my hands. She knew it would force a confrontation. She knew it would unleash the ugliness they kept hidden beneath a veneer of familial obligation. But she also knew that it was the only way I would ever be free. She didn't just give me the resources to leave. She created a crisis so severe that I had to. This journey taught me that boundaries are not acts of aggression. They are acts of self-preservation. For years, I thought that saying no, that setting a boundary, meant I was being selfish or unkind. Now I understand that healthy boundaries are the only things that make true, loving relationships possible. They are the lines we draw to say, "I love you, but I also love myself, and I will not allow you to harm me in the name of family." The people who truly love you will respect those lines. The ones who don't, well, they reveal that their love was always conditional, based on what you could do for them, not on who you are. I also learned that family isn't always about blood. My parents and my brother were my biological family, but they were not my true support system. My true family turned out to be Chloe, who answered my panicked call in the middle of the night; Isabella, the lawyer who fought for me with the ferocity of a lioness; Maria, who cares for my sister like her own; and the community that embraced my little bookstore. Family is the people who show up, the people who see you, the people who celebrate your strength rather than exploiting your kindness. And perhaps the most beautiful part of this journey is what I'm teaching Luna, even without words. She sees me making decisions. She sees me surrounded by people who respect me. She sees that love doesn't have to hurt, and that caregiving doesn't require martyrdom. We are breaking a generational cycle, she and I. The inheritance my grandmother left wasn't just for me. It was a down payment on a future where the women in this family don't have to set themselves on fire just to keep everyone else warm. If you are in a situation like mine, if you feel invisible or taken for granted by the very people who are supposed to cherish you, please know this: your worth is not determined by the role they have assigned you. You are more than a caregiver, more than a peacekeeper, more than a second choice. You are the author of your own story, and you have the right to write a chapter that is just about you. It can be terrifying to pick up that pen, especially when you've been told your story doesn't matter. But the moment you do, the moment you decide that your dreams are not frivolous and your well-being is not negotiable, is the moment you begin to reclaim your life. The court may have delivered a legal verdict, but the final judgment was mine to make. I chose to build a life of purpose, peace, and joy. I chose to honor my grandmother's legacy not by hoarding her gift, but by using it to create a world of safety and opportunity for myself and my sister. And I chose to believe, finally, that I was worthy of it all. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to fundamentally redefine your relationship with your family to protect your own well-being? What was the moment you realized you had to draw a line in the sand? Share your stories and experiences in the comments below. Your story might be the one that gives someone else the courage they need to take that first terrifying step. If this story resonated with you, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might need to hear this message. Your support allows us to continue bringing these real-life stories of strength and resilience to light. Thank you for listening. And remember, sometimes the people who try to bury you don't realize that you are a seed, ready to grow.